We want to get into a panel discussion, ladies and gentlemen. I have the privilege of calling up the panelists, and what I will do, I will call them forward individually as they come on stage, starting from the far end as we continue filling all these particular spaces. So the first panelist, please, would be able to come closer to me as we all come from my extreme left. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our first panelist is a humanitarian resilience and inclusion lead for UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Ladies and gentlemen, help me appreciate the one and only Mr. David Kinyua as he comes forward to join the panel. Welcome, Mr. Kinyua. We are glad to have you here. Our second panelist, ladies and gentlemen, is the Chief Executive Officer at BOMA.NGO. Please help me appreciate with a warm round of applause Mr. Sam Owili as he comes forward. Sam Owili bringing quite the expertise to this particular conversation. And our next panelist, ladies and gentlemen, is the Chief Government Relations Officer at Village Enterprise. Please help me appreciate the seasoned speaker and quite the gentleman, Mr. Tadeo Morioki, as he comes forward. Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, the icing on the cake and the cherry on top, please help me appreciate once again the Global Director at CHASP Advisory to come and join the panel. Please help me appreciate Mr. Omondi Otieno as he comes to join us in this particular conversation. Welcome once again. We are glad to have you here. We had one more panelist who is going to come and join us here. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a lady that you have seen and heard the expertise that she's been able to bring on the table, the director at the Social Protection Secretariat. Please, once again, help me appreciate Ms. Jane Muyanga as she comes forward to join this particular conversation.
Thank you very much. My name is David Kinyua, working at the British High Commission here in Nairobi. People know it FCDO. For those people who work in the humanitarian sector. So I lead a team that look at the humanitarian work, resilience work, but also inclusion. So yes, thank you, and I'm privileged to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Kinyua. Glad to have you here as well. Let us get to hear from Mr. Sam.
Hi, everyone, and happy 5th birthday, Charles. My name is Sam Owili, and I work for BOMA. At BOMA, we implement poverty graduation approach, working with extreme poor households, supporting them to start small, profitable businesses, offer them coaching and mentorship to help them to sustainably escape extreme poverty. I'm glad to be here and honored to celebrate this milestone. What I didn't get is where they fall in the spectrum of generation, whether they are Gen Z or Gen X, but I'll get to know.
Good evening once again. Like you've been told, my name is Jane Muyanga Kitili. I head the National Social Protection Secretariat. We just want to kind of put our heads together and see what is this animal called poverty graduation and how can we navigate around it to ensure that our people live better lives. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening. First of all, congratulations, Wendy and team. This is such a remarkable accomplishment, so we're really happy to be here celebrating with you. My name is Tadeo Morioki. I work for an organization called Village Enterprise, and our focus is really just similar to BOMA, working with people living in extreme poverty. We work across several countries. We work in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and a few other countries where we do technical assistance. And as my role is really to support governments in terms of adoption and scaling of poverty graduation. You sometimes will hear poverty graduation, economic inclusion. It's one and the same thing. It's just people refer it differently. Government circles love using economic inclusion. So thank you, and glad to be here.
Thank you, Tadeo. And to the man who doesn't need an introduction, but just in case someone walked in and is seeing him from the very first time.
Great. My name is Omondi Otieno, and I lead the team at CHASP Advisory.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Omondi. And now our key focus for this particular conversation is the hits and misses of the ultra poor graduation here in Kenya. But we want to have a better understanding of the UPGs, all right? And I'd like to throw this to Sam. Sam, for probably someone who is hearing this for the very first time, please, if you would be able to be so kind as to help us just frame this particular conversation in better understanding the ultra poor graduation. In your own words, how would you best explain the UPG? Here in Kenya, and also, I know not just in Kenya, especially when it comes to your expertise, I know it also cuts across the borders, but please, in your own words, if you can be able just to give us guidance on that.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Ian. And when you look at ultra poverty graduation, I think the first question we need to ask ourselves is the nexus between poverty and social protection. And the people who spoke before us, I think, have tried to define that, looking at social protection as a mechanism for supporting the vulnerable groups. And there can be no better vulnerability than those living in extreme poverty. Globally, we have about 700 million of them, about 50% of whom are in sub-Saharan Africa. And those that live in extreme poverty hardly find a mechanism to earn $2.15 a day. I mean, the UN SDGs project that we should have nobody living in poverty by 2030. But the data and the status that we are witnessing now actually suggests a different case, that we might have about 545 million of them living in extreme poverty. So as people living in this part of the world, we've taken it upon ourselves to try and find mechanisms and approaches that would support us to change the story, to change the narrative, and therefore build approaches that would target the extreme poor, and then support them through a sequenced set of interventions that are time-bound and with clearly measurable metrics to determine whether or not they've graduated from extreme poverty. And that was the birth of what we call the graduation approach, which is part of the broader economic inclusion programs supported by job creation, supported by microfinance engagements, and graduation being one of them. So when we talk about ultra poverty graduation, we are talking about a methodology. It is an approach that is targeted and forms a foundational basis for us to change the story of people living in extreme poverty.
Right, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And it's quite interesting that even 50% of those living in that particular consortium are here in Africa. I'd like to bring it also to Mr. Otieno. What would be your addition to the UPG? And also just to probably add on to what Sam is saying.
Yeah, I think Sam is spot on. Possibly what I could do is to try and break it down. What really happens is that governments are usually very quick to build social assistance programs. Now, social assistance mostly targets populations that are not productive. Okay, which is why you have cash transfer for programs for children without parents, for the orphan and vulnerable children, which is why you have cash transfers for persons living with disabilities, which is why you have the universal pension scheme for those above the age of 70 in this country. But usually there is a missing middle that live in poverty. So I'm talking about somebody at the age of 35 who is living in some corner of Marsabit. The very context in which they live makes them a lot less productive. They don't have instruments of productivity. Value chains are far more broken down. Yet there is an opportunity for us to invest in these particular houses living in poverty. Just give them the right tools. And I think that is why some talks about job creation, some talks about investment in microfinance and all these skills, so that then they are able themselves to be a lot more productive and get out of poverty. Now that is what is called graduation, right? So I think that is probably the simplicity I wanted to throw into it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Mr. Otieno. And I love the way it's actually even coming out, the key focus to make sure that we can be able to graduate them and also giving them the ways and how they can be able to do that. Let me go into the first point of the discussion, and this is the impact of UPG on the poverty reduction. So here we just want to have a little bit of time to discuss on the success stories and also the key achievements. But to the panel, and what is your general perspective on UPG and the extent to which it can contribute to reduce poverty, all right? And what I want to do is that we want to get to the policy discussion on this. And let me just come to Jane on this particular sector. And Jane, what would be your take when it comes to that in terms of the policies that we can be able to implement? What is your general perspective on UPG and the extent to which it can contribute to reducing poverty from a policy point of view?
Thank you very much for that. And I think, like you had earlier asked, is when we talk of the ultra poor, what are we basically talking about? And when we talk about policies that address that category of our population, then what are we talking about? And for me, I want to bring it to our lowest level and just ask a simple question. How many of us in the room have children who are below the age of 10? Now, think of yourself in Mukuru slums, waking up in the morning, you have your 3 babies who are below 10, and you have absolutely nothing to give them. And you are not even sure whether tomorrow you will get something to give them. How does that define you? Because when we are talking of ultra poor, that is basically what we are looking at. And when we come now to the policy conversation, we are asking ourselves, are the social protection interventions we are giving making sense? And we are now moving away from targeted programming to a more of a life cycle approach, where we are saying our social protection should be able to take care of me from the womb to the tomb. The reason being, from conception to 2 years, it's a window of opportunity in terms of my cognitive development as a person. And that has a component of the nutrition. When I become a child, what are the issues, child protection issues, that I require to ensure that I exploit my potential? So when we are talking about, like for example, in government now, we are talking about the cash plus. Just don't give people cash. What else can they do with that cash? Or what else can you do with them with that cash? And that is where the issue of the economic inclusion is coming in, where we want to build the capacities of households to be able to stand on their own. And with our economic inclusion programming, I remember going to Kisumu, and there's a lady who told us that was the 9th business she was starting. And it was the first business for her that went beyond 6 months. The reason for this, like Tadeo has said, is you have targeted interventions in terms of mentoring. How do these people look at their incomes? And she was telling us anytime she would have a nice day selling whatever it was she was selling, she looked at the money in the cash box as money for use. She never had the knowledge of trying to separate our expenditures from that cash box. So when it comes to now the policy narrative, we want to look at a life cycle approach where we are saying from the time you are conceived to the time you die, what are the social protection interventions that we should be able to put in place to ensure that we do not sink in poverty, and those that are in poverty, how can we pull them out of that kind of a scenario?
Thank you for that, Jane. And I like the way you've started up your point by saying the policies that we have in place, are they actually working? Because it's important to audit what is currently there so that now we can understand, is it working, and how we can be able to do it differently. And I love the way you touched also on finance. And I'd like to throw this to Mr. Kinyua, and I know he's passionate about the finance part of the UPG. Mr. Kinyua, if you'd be so kind just to chime in on this particular conversation from a finance aspect.
Maybe before even we ask, what do we finance? Or why are we financing UPG? We need to understand where Kenya is at the moment so that we know what we are financing. So Kenya is a very unique country when you look at it compared to the other sub-Saharan Africa countries. It is the only country that has been growing with, for the last 20 years. We hear that Kenya is growing at 4.9% at an average for the last 10 years. But then at the macros, you see very big numbers. But down here, you hear people saying we don't have money in our pockets, which is the real thing. Utasikia kila Mkenya, everybody is a Kenyan here. Every Kenyan is saying we are seeing big numbers, but we don't have money in our pocket. So what is happening is we have economic growth that is led by infrastructure development, but the people down here don't feel it. So what UPG should be trying to do is actually connect these people down here to this economic growth, and this is actually what we are trying to do with the economic inclusion, to try and connect these people down here to the macro, so that they also feel that money is coming into their pockets. Then when you understand that then you are able to look at what are you financing. So what you want to finance is people to have businesses so that they are able to tap into the macros. If it is a road that a person down there in Garissa is able to produce food and transport it, then you are connecting them to this road that is being constructed and people saying there is big, economic growth in Kenya. Then you are able to know what you are financing, and then you can target that person to finance that person to have a business, to grow their own food, to be sustainable. But I don't want to use the name resilience or self-sufficient.
Yeah.
I want to say that we want people to produce their own food,
Yes.
Be able to take their own children to school without looking at, begging. That is one thing. But then you look at this, but then you say, even if I give them food, the biggest thing that they have, the biggest problem that they have is actually health. Even if you give them small businesses, they get one health issue, and all the investments that they had is gone. So the other thing that you have to finance is actually health insurance. So when you are doing all this, you also have to look at health insurance. Beyond this, there is also climate. I don't want to call it climate change now. It's already a climate crisis. So what you want also to do is look at how are they affected by climate, and how do you tap on international climate financing to be able, we contribute very lowly to climate crisis. But the countries that contribute to this should be able, to channel their money to finance some of the things that we do for climate crisis. So when I look at this, then we look at financing from three perspectives. One, making sure that you connect the poor people to the macros. But how do you do that? By making sure that you have systems in place, financing systems in place that are able to get into the government fiscal system, and the government fiscal system is able to finance this at scale using domestic sources. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kinyua. I love what you said about making sure that you can be able to create that bridge so that now we can be able to be part of the macros. The people on the lower end can be part of the macros, and also enabling them, even when it comes to starting a business whereby they can, even if the road is being constructed, they can be able to transport their produce on that. Now, coming still on this particular conversation, and I want to bring it to Tadeo before I come to Sam. Now, the general perspective definitely of UPG and how it can be able to reduce poverty. Do we reinvent the wheel, or is there a little bit of innovation, new ways that we can be able to bring to the table? What are your thoughts on this, Mr. Tadeo?
Yeah, one of the things I think also we need to really expound on is why the focus on poverty graduation, right? Because we have tons and tons of livelihood programs, okay? But poverty graduation, first of all, there's global evidence using what we call RCTs and other very rigorous evaluations that of all the livelihood programs that have been tested or implemented, it is the one that is the most successful in getting people out of extreme poverty. Okay? So that's why you see Sam and I and other people here really focusing on that, because it is the closest silver bullet in terms of being able to pull people out of extreme poverty. And there's global evidence. Different countries have done this. Bangladesh, India, in Central America, in Africa. So that's the reason we really have to think about this is the approach that we need to be focusing on, and hence, partners like FCDO, World Bank, and several governments being able to take it up. In terms of innovation, I think we could really think about innovations in different ways. First of all, innovations in terms of being able to reach more people. We talked about technology. How can we be able to use technology to be able to say, instead of having, we go to the communities and having one person do this, could we use technology? Could we use digital training to be able to reach a lot more people? Could we also use, in terms of when we're talking to partners like FCDO, something in terms of financing, what we call results-based financing. So instead of, and you see a lot of funding or NGOs or partners doing this, we fund activities, but can we be able to fund for results? So that we say, you give funding only on once you're able to pull somebody out of extreme poverty, not just because they've attended many workshops or they've attended some activity or something. So really thinking about different ways of doing this. CHASP is already doing ODR, being able to make sure that we are bringing in people who have been left out. So if you can go to a community, maybe targeting has been done, enhanced social registry, but making sure that we're up to date, we have some ways of being able to make sure that people are not being left out. So we can be able to think about innovations in a very broad spectrum, but I think what I really want to focus is on the fact that the innovations, I would say also speaking maybe for BOMA and the village enterprise, we've been doing this alone or as what we call direct implementation, but we've realized we need to work with partners, especially with government. Government is a place where we need to work closely with so that we can reach a lot more people. Government has the reach, has the resources, and has the systems to be able to do that. Thank you.
Right. I love the angle that you've taken about financing results and not just attending workshops. So I won't get a sitting allowance for attending a workshop, but it is results oriented. Let me go to the seasoned person who is experienced when it comes to, who has a wealth of wisdom when it comes to the experience. Mr. Sam, still on the UPG, and an extent it can be able to reduce poverty. What learnings can we be able to bring forward, even as we chart the way forward? What learnings can we say that this is what we have learned in the past, and this is what we can be able to put on the table as we channel the way forward?
That's a challenging question, I would say, because I come from the school of thought that believes that we've already done enough innovation, and maybe it is time to start replication. And having said that, 84% of people living in extreme poverty are in the rural areas. And I don't know about you, but for some of us who are brought up in the rural areas, there's the risk of normalizing poverty, because that is what you are born knowing. So sometimes when people say you're poor, you don't actually realize that, there's something you are missing until you actually get to see other people. And so there's actually a risk of normalizing it. Yeah. And to Madam Jane's point, when you look at the profiles for the extreme poor, you would actually realize that women are disproportionately affected, and children suffer more. In fact, 50% of those living in extreme poverty are children, yet children only form about 31% of our total population. And you might ask yourself why I'm reflecting on this data. It reminds us about looking at it from a justice perspective of the importance of prioritizing solutions that work. And as we prioritize such solutions, like the poverty graduation approach, that, as Tadeo has rightly put, has been proven to be impactful and effective in lifting people out of extreme poverty and sustaining it long term. So we don't need to do further tests. We don't need to do additional experiments to prove the model. We don't need to revolutionize it, but we do need to evolutionize it to make it much more effective. And I think that's really the direction that we should be taking. And I'm happy that for Kenya, I'm very proud of our government because they've not only identified this as a solution, but they've also decided to own it. They've gone beyond adoption. Adopting, you can adopt, but do you really own it? Because when you own it, you make sure that the policies are in place, you make sure that the legislation is working, and if you listen to the PS, all of these are in motion thanks to the work that has been done by the captains who are seated here with me. So, what I would add to this is we do need as a country to take the leap. We need to take the quantum leap and put into action with support from some of our partners like FCDO, the World Bank, the foundations that are supporting this kind of work, to start investing so that we can achieve the big dream of ending extreme poverty, because it is doable. Just one part I would want to mention, that if we don't do this, because from 2014 onwards, we've actually seen the poverty reduction slowing down at a decreasing rate. Because looking at the period between 1990 and 2019, we actually had a significant reduction in poverty levels from 38 to about 8.4%. Meaning in 1990, we had about 1 in every 3 persons living in extreme poverty. In 2019, it was actually 1 out of 10. But now we have seen that starting to decrease. So if we don't act now, and then the challenges of COVID, which pushed 80 million people into poverty, the issues of high food and energy prices, and the issues of climate change or climate crisis, as we put it. So we do need, as this group, to look at taking a more accelerated approach to address the challenge, given that we already have the solution, bundling it up with other interventions that would buttress the impact and effectiveness of the approach. This includes investing in, for example, consumption support to cushion for the immediate needs, establishing basic needs, providing water, sanitation, hygiene, schooling, and so on, and then also strengthening the human capital to make sure that the intergenerational cycle of the chain of the intergenerational cycle of poverty is broken. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, and also how you have a key focus on to evolutionize it. Thank you very much for also bringing that up. And yes, definitely we need to focus on that particular trajectory. Let me bring it back to Mr. Omondi, and at this particular point in time, we want to briefly discuss the challenges and also the shortcomings. So what have been the main challenges and shortcomings faced during the implementation of these models from a program point of view? Let's get to hear from you. What are some of the challenges, roadblocks?
I actually don't know if that's my question. I mean, it's fair to say that is not my question. Largely because we are just beginning, I think, implementation. Our focus on UPG is very nascent. Probably about 4 months old, right? So I wouldn't say that the challenges would be experiential. And so I would possibly leave it to Sam and Tadio here who have, and actually the government who have really implemented that, I think, for a long time. But off the top of my head, and I think this could potentially be very generic, and colleagues feel free to disagree, right? I think a good place to begin from, especially with the challenges, one would be the policy setup, right? Graduation in this country is an evolving model, and I think it's fair to say that it's still new. The government is picking it up, and thanks to the CHASP program supported by the bank. But then we still are yet to wrap our heads properly around what the graduation policy really should be for Kenya in terms of writing. The practices established, I think there's a lot of lessons that have been drawn, but in terms of those policy and possibly even the operational frameworks, government guidelines for EIP or for poverty graduation definitely is one of those things that certainly require conversation. The other is definitely a resource conversation, right? So we are looking at a lot of growth having been happened, and when I say growth, is in terms of domestic investment on social assistance. At the moment, it is fair to say that the bulk of investment on graduation basically comes from FCDO and the World Bank, right? And we are yet to see increasing domestic investment in social protection. And think that in itself, to the extent that this hasn't been adopted to that level, I think definitely that in itself continues to present a challenge. The good thing, which might not necessarily shape as a challenge, because I have been in that sector 4 months or so, is coordination. But that coordination is very, very well established at the national level. So national level coordination for poverty graduation, I think, is top notch. We have had, I think, engagements. I see the nature of engagements that happen, and you definitely, much as you can say, there's always a lot more to be done, but definitely that seems to be in a good place. There's a lot of good working relationship between all these, like I would say, captains, and that I think is in a good place. What I think requires a bit of work is the coordination at the county level, right? And even the role of county level in promoting poverty graduation is a conversation that is still happening. So it's fair to say that stays as a challenge, but then that could, I would say, like the sector is evolving, it's definitely work in progress.
Yeah, you really touched on a number of points that I was going to say. I think as Omondi has said, this is still